Right.
You know you're Celtic when you get sunburn on your legs.
Really, I mean, there was a story about two Celtic monks on Anglesey, and they used to go from opposite ends of the island at different times, and so one of them ended up with a suntan on that side of his face, and the other had it on. Yeah, well, we might end up a bit Celtic, I suppose, but why not? So, great to see you all out braving the elements and waving the midges and all that sort of stuff. Again, hey, we got wild geese as well, as we should, of course, on Iona. The job I've landed up with, by the grace of God, is environmental chaplain for Eco Congregation Scotland. So probably environmental spirituality should be my stock in trade. So I'm not an. People expect me to know an awful lot about heat pumps and solar panels, and I've got people in the organisation who really do know about all that stuff. But I'm about making connections within the church between care for creation, including those jackdaws up there, and our life and work and worship, and just getting all those things together. I've been an Iona community member for about 29 years, following a very formative short time as a volunteer in the Abbey, as sort of dog's body and general setter-upper for J. Philip Newell when he was warden in 1990. So I ought to have soaked in something Celtic, I suppose, not least the habit of enjoying a reflective swim in the sea in the early morning, and I gather one or two of you have been getting up to that. Congratulations. Even if I haven't yet managed to arrange the services of the otters who came to dry St. Cuthbert after his dip off Lindisfarne. Now, I tell that because it is a story that makes folks smile and some wonder, but when things are as strange and fragile as they now seem to be, it may be in our joking that we first dare to encounter a truth that we have to deal with. I noticed a bit of laughter in the midst of the liturgy yesterday. That's no bad thing. It doesn't worry me anymore when I go to a church on a Sunday and I say more or less that the end of the world is nigh, and they say, "Oh, a lovely service, Minister." And that's great, because it's in the sacred space of the good news that the bad news belongs. It's there that we have the spiritual resources to begin to encounter it, maybe with a bit of humour as well. I'm getting all the illustrations here with the midges. When the reformer John Calvin was asked about bitey insects and annoying bugs and things like that, he replied that in them we encounter God as avenger, which I thought was some evidence that Calvin, alongside being the proud possessor of the finest private wine collection in Geneva, actually did have a sense of humour. But since then, I've had cause to reassess the scary concept of God's wrath, which in an Old Testament context is very much cause and effect. If you jump off a cliff, you experience the wrath of God in the injuries you sustain. And if you burn fossil fuels for a few centuries on an unprecedented scale, and you destabilise the balance of nature all current life depends on, that's the wrath of God, in an Old Testament sort of way. It's what you bring on yourselves, although this version, to our even greater distress, afflicts those around you. It doesn't just get you, it gets everyone, everything around you. In a time of crisis, though, some of the stuff we have fought shy of, like justified fear, and remember all those mentions of the fear of the Lord in the Bible? It has a purpose. Mm-hmm. That maybe needs to be reassessed and recycled and repurposed. Not just fought shy of, because it sounds a bit fire and brimstone and scary and stuff like that. I'm actually very fire and brimstone myself, as you've noticed. So, as Scotland's happiest apocalyptic preacher, I've often also been surprised how thoughts we entertain as jokes turn out, while remaining jokes, to be rather more than that. I am Jeremiah, the prophet of doom, but I'm also Barnabas the encourager. Sometimes you struggle, though, to encourage rather than just grumble. And I sometimes think that, never mind sanitizer, churches have been sprayed with connecticide, some noxious cocktail of chemicals which prevents us exercising the common human faculty of poetically bringing things together, which we nonetheless proclaim to do, to remember, for instance, Christ in every communion or Eucharistic service. What sort of scales need to fall from our eyes before, like the scribe of the kingdom, we go and have a good old dig in our box of treasures and come out with something old as well as something new? I'll start with something very, very old indeed. Something very, very old. It's a prayer, and it goes like this. O God, enlarge within us the sense of fellowship with all living things, our siblings, the animals to whom you gave the earth as their home, in common with us. We remember with shame that in the past we have exercised the high dominion of humanity with ruthless cruelty, so that the voice of the earth, which should have gone up to you in song, has been a groan of pain. May we realize that they live not for us alone, but for themselves and for you, and that they love the sweetness of life. Now, if someone had just written that yesterday, I'd say that's absolutely perfect for my purposes. The idea that animals have their own right to exist in their own right, that they have feelings, communicate. This was written by Basil the Great, who died in 379 and was renowned as a defender of Christian orthodoxy. Christianity, in its very great diversity, has within it, I really would say, far more of help for its adherents and the societies and communities they inhabit than it has hindrance. Although the choices from that incredible repertoire, and remember that picture of the treasure box that you dig in, we still need inspired guidance, as well as, in an Iona prayer, courage, faith and cheerfulness to make the choices from what's there. What I suppose I'm therefore keen to assert myself is that concern with the human place in the web of life as a whole should and can be ever more mainstream. We should not be content with it being sort of shuffled off into little... That's those green people over there, that we need the tree huggers on Sunday.
Can we have some peat huggers as well?
Certainly.
And some wetland huggers.
Wetland huggers, peat huggers. Of course, you need the right tree in the right place, don't you? Mm-hmm. That was something I saw at COP. Again, let's just go through it. What COP is, it's the Conference of the Parties to the Intergovernmental Framework Convention on Climate Change. I don't need to say that anymore. You got it? Okay. Again, there was a peatland pavilion at COP. Mm-hmm. And people from all over the world who know about peatland were getting together. And so we really are at a stage where it makes no sense whatsoever to deny what's going on. So what I'm saying is that care for creation should be in the middle. It should be mainstream. It should be headlining Christianity. It has integrity and history and very much scripture on its side, though all of these things do come to us always interpreted. It's a bit like that phrase, some people are gay, get used to it. The Bible is always interpreted, get used to it. And the agendas and the slants and the nuances of our devotional material, the ways they're presented, are something to get used to. And some of them are good, and some of them are bad, and some very ugly indeed. And environmental spirituality needs always humbly to acknowledge a component of discernment, accountability, because we're not just making things up. You have to be responsible for what you do, and also that most godlike of all attributes, a readiness to change your mind when evidence makes that appropriate. So, of course, what you mean by evidence is also sometimes open to debate. An environmental spirituality and a Christian one, I believe, at this time, and again, this is one of the choices I'm suggesting you make, is definitely an engaged one. It's not, we're going to withdraw, we're not getting involved, we'll leave you to it. An engaged one, though needing to cope with the enduring fact that the church is not in charge and humanity is not in control. Even if simply in terms of the scale of our activities, we are rapidly destabilizing the systems which have nurtured all the cultures and religions during the amazingly stable age we call the Holocene. That's roughly the last 10,000 years since this place was no longer covered with glaciers. That's the time. We've had this 10,000 years. What's going on with that? Jackdaw isn't chasing the swallow, is it? No. If we get an otter, I know I've lost you all, won't I mean, quite. So, we've had this amazing space of 10,000 years of stability, and pretty well everything of human culture and most religions are built on that thing. And again, since that erratic boulder on the south end of Iona was dumped there, that's about how long it is. In the psalm this morning, in worship, there was a classic scriptural appeal to the resilience of creation. Don't know if you spotted that. That the hills are eternal or something. There's something like that in one of the Psalms. And maybe that's another good starting point this evening, that an appropriate Christian environmental spirituality is one which allows for fragility rather than merely the impregnability of the world in as whom we live. We are, I think I'd say culturally at the moment, in the global north. That's probably the polite way we've worked out of referring to ourselves. But here we've been very intimidated by the mixed blessing that we like to call the Enlightenment. And some of you, I've listened to conversations this week, are well aware of that. That idea that it was a blossoming of rational thought and science, but a tremendous confidence in our ability to improve on nature as it is. A bit less negotiation with, a bit more, this is what you're going to do, that sort of thing. And humanity obviously very much in charge. And I suppose the dominant reading of Christianity also played a part in this. The King James Bible presents the purpose of humanity as to have dominion over the fish in the sea. And, yeah. But of course we can add that the next few hundred pages of the Old Testament give you infinite examples of how bad and unjust rulers mess things up completely. Also within that first chapter, of course, you have the great light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night. And, there's a lot of delegation going on. It isn't just humans that get a job to do. The earth actually is commanded to bring forth the creatures. So it's not that straightforward, but if people are trying to use the Bible for a purpose, as of course I am, they don't always spot the bits that undermine that. Noting then, I noted with very great approval about the Church of Scotland, their Theological Forum of the Church of Scotland has written a theological account of creation care. And their main point is that creation care for the Church must be Christ-centered. That Jesus is in the midst of it, that Jesus is what it's about. The church needs to have the confidence to have something definitive to say, and if it's the church, it involves Jesus. And I definitely agree, though because of that, I'd also take a cue from Jesus that those who are not against us are for us. That's a very important principle when we share a planet. The conference took place in Glasgow. On the day before, there was a gathering of many different faith groups in George Square. So with COVID restrictions in place and goodness knows what, and with a diesel generator chugging away, let's have a moment of silence. Chug, 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 chug. Just to emphasise the fossil fuel dimension. There was a gathering of representatives of faiths, and what was great was that they were there being themselves. There was less compromise about who they were than I've seen at any other interfaith gathering. And that was great because, Muslims and pagans, and two lots of Muslims, various versions of Christianity, the Baha'i, all sorts of people were there asserting who they were and asserting confidently that they care for creation. So you can be yourself thoroughly and find what treasures you have within your own tradition and still find you have common ground with people of other faiths. That, if only that happened, COP was worthwhile, it seemed to me. I said the conference took place in Glasgow. It was hosted by the UK government, though the authority of their presidency was really undermined by everyone's awareness that the UK was about to approve not only new coal mines, but also new oil and gas projects in the North Sea, which they've now gone ahead and done, by the way, this last week. Legally, they have every right to. Morally, it's alarming. A bit more about COP, because, again, because it's happened, I think things have to be different. I mean, we were talking to churches together in Glasgow, and we said, it can't be like the Commonwealth Games. You know, the Commonwealth Games, you're really hospitable, it comes and people run up and down and throw things. I forgot jumping up and down and probably falling over as well. COP26 was billed as the most important gathering of our species ever and vital to the safety of the planet and human cultures. And the churches in the UK did quite a bit of work together to prepare. But a few months after, I'd questioned the extent both to which we pushed ourselves beyond previous insights and to which we've been able to follow up how we should be different, because we've had this thing on our doorstep. Have you heard of an encyclical called Laudato Si'? An encyclical is traditionally a letter which is written by the Pope to the bishops and cardinals, but this one actually was addressed to everyone of goodwill.
Everyone of goodwill.
Everyone of goodwill. Are you of goodwill?
Right. So not even just people in the Roman Catholic Church.
That's correct.
Wow.
You're included. Okay. That Laudato Si' was addressed to everyone of goodwill. Yeah, not just one branch of the church. And the great thing about this was Pope Francis is himself into recycling, because he decided to recycle St. Francis of Assisi by choosing that name. At the beginning of this encyclical, he quotes St. Francis of Assisi. "Praise be to you, my Lord," he says, and in the words of this beautiful canticle, St. Francis of Assisi reminds us that our common home, that's a very key phrase there, common home, is like a sister with whom we share our life, and a beautiful mother who opens her arms to embrace us. Praise be to you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us, and produces various fruit with coloured flowers and herbs. So this introduces the idea of Earth as a common home. And I think this is particularly biblical. There is plenty to support that, in the sense that God gives to other creatures the same earth as habitat as God gives to our species. In the book of Job, you get God giving the wilderness to the wild ass as their home, in the same sort of way as we're given a home as well. And this was greatly appreciated in previous centuries, if you remember that opening prayer. The common home also insists on the beauty and appropriateness of approaching Earth as you would a beloved relative. A mother even which does evoke common ground with so many religious traditions around the earth. I won't, though, get too bogged down in the gender stereotypes there. Sister, mother, they're the caring ones. I think that's the intention. But how we treat issues of gender justice has been shown to sort of lodge right in the same sort of place as climate justice. For instance, that in the empowerment and education of women where those things are not happening, that leads to a fall in the birth rate, it leads to lower infant mortality, and a different approach to the shape of economies. Help women and you help the planet. And again, quite amazingly, this was recognised by a day at COP devoted to gender issues. And if in Christ there is neither male nor female, as well as Jew, Gentile, black, white, slave, and all the rest, then A spirituality aimed at overcoming those toxic inequalities while including also the voice of the earth. I hope that should earn the label environmental. So all sorts of justice actually end up working together. And I wonder if, are we surprised at that? Do we say that's the way we always thought it to be? Don't hive off the different sorts of justice, though again people have done that. Where Laudato Si gets really radical, and so radical that many people who write books and articles on it just don't seem to have noticed this, is when it goes on, our sister Mother Earth who sustains and governs us. And maybe it's our contempt for beauty as a grown-up religious concept that enables us to disregard the radicality of a sentence which then goes on to talk about flowers and fruits and herbs and things like that. The human race is very much dependent on and not in charge of the life cycles of this planet. But it sticks in the craw of spiritualities which have borrowed from the empire which the New Testament so detests. It's borrowed that joy of conquest, the joy of victory, the joy of trampling down your enemies, I suppose. So we have to discover how to negotiate, to give as well as take, to sit down at the table with creation, rather than continue to wage war on this beloved relative who sustains us. Liberal Western intellectual culture loves to play a really beautiful game when people debate things. This is what I think was impressed on me at university as civilization. It doesn't really matter what the outcome is, as long as you go through the motions, as long as you debate properly. But of course our dear friend President Trump, with his comment about good people on both sides, sort of rather put paid to that. The climate crisis is likewise a situation which is difficult if you've grown up in this attitude of, people would call it postmodernism. Everybody has the right to their opinion and that's perfectly all right. It isn't polite or loving or helpful to leave alone a fellow Christian who's soaked up the pseudoscience because they have a right to their opinion. If you wanted some guidance there, have a look at Matthew chapter 18 about how to run a church with members with toxic views and behaviour. I think it goes that far back. Climate denial, if I may put it that way, should be no more acceptable in a Christian community than racism, and it's comparable in very many ways. First of all, it is plain stupid. The evidence is there. It's pretty clear. It does real harm, because our beliefs really do have a bearing on our behaviour. And it's deeply embedded in all sorts of ways in this capitalist system from which so many benefit so much at the expense of so many others, including those fellow stakeholders in the Rainbow Covenant, the non-human relatives and friends that Catherine was mentioning in the sermon yesterday. Was that yesterday? Seems a long time ago already.